Hello everyone and welcome to Late Online from the Natural History Museum. I'm Christina and tonight we are taking a look at our waste world. Now I've got a few questions for you. How much rubbish did you throw in the bin today? Did you even pay attention to that? How much went into the recycling bin? How much went into other bins? And at the moment, as you're watching this, do you have any lights on in a room that nobody's in at the moment? Tonight, we'll be exploring an issue that affects every single person on the planet, and that is waste. Whether it be household rubbish or waste food, we all produce staggering amounts of this stuff. And it's actually having a significant impact in our environment and our health. During tonight's show, please send in your comments, your questions, your reflections, because we're going to be throwing loads of questions at you. And we want you to think about what we are talking about. Think about what you do yourself, what you can do, what you can tell other people to do. So please do interact with us. And don't worry if you're not sure about something, just give us your ideas, give us your comments. My two guests this evening look at this topic from two very different angles. Let's say hello to Alex McGoran, who is a PhD student at the Natural History Museum, who is studying plastic pollution. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex.
Hi, good evening.
Thank you for being there. And let's also welcome Robin Armstrong, who is a geologist working in mining consultancy at the museum. Hello, Robin.
Hey guys, good evening. Hope you're all well.
I think we are ready for the show. I think that's what we are. But thank you so much for you both for joining us today. Now, before I start talking to you both, let's talk to our audience. I've got a question for people watching. And that is, how many different types of waste you can think of? On the spot, whatever comes to mind, put it in the chat. It might be plastic bottles, something that we see every day. It might be crisp packets as well. But think maybe bigger. Think about more generic terms as well. Household waste, industrial waste. Maybe think about things that are less useful. Your phone. What else do you throw away? So put it in the chat. It doesn't matter what it is. Anything that comes to mind, even if you write something and then something else comes to mind, put it in. We're quite curious to see what people think. But as people are putting that on the chat, Alex, tell us a little bit more about your research, because I think plastic is the ways that we're more used to using, but also disposing of, and also seeing in the news. Can you tell us a little bit more about plastic and how is your research on it about?
So plastic, I think, is the first thing we think of when we think of waste, or at least it's one of the first things I think of. But I'm a plastic researcher, so I'm maybe a little biased. But it's something we use often for a very short amount of time, and then we get rid of it. So it's a very immediate waste. And whilst crisp packets and plastic bottles are sort of an aspect of my research, most of what I look at is actually what we call microplastics. And these are tiny pieces of plastic that are smaller than a lead tool. So at the biggest end of a microplastic, you could see it, but at the very small fine scale, they can go all the way down to nano-sized particles. These are 1,000th of a millimeter, so very, very tiny particles. And I'm a biologist, so I want to know how the environment, how the animals interact with them. So the image you can see here is actually me looking through the digestive tract and the stomach and the intestines of a fish to see how much plastic's in it. If that fish ate plastic and then a seal came along and ate that fish, would the plastic still be in the seal? Or once the fish was digested, would the plastic pass away in the feces? And these are the sort of questions that I want to explore.
Absolutely. That also makes me think, if I eat a fish, will the plastic come into my body as well? So I suppose that's going up that change in there. That's really, really interesting. And as you said, it's something that is so close to us. So we've had some answers coming from our viewers. Ollie was really quick. They said cans, boots, furniture, and he actually mentioned in Spain this is a classic. It is true. There are, I think, in different cities there are days when you can put furniture on the street for people to pick up actually. So I don't know if I would call that waste, but maybe I'm a bit biased. Elsa was mentioning shampoo and conditioner bottles. I suppose that would be including plastics maybe. There's a huge movement now in using plastic less and shampoos and conditioners and soaps as well. And there's also people talking about not just the chemicals that we've done, but also the way they react as well. People are talking about human excrement as well, car parts. So we're going quite big over here. But thank you so much for sending those. I've got another answer for you. Now that you think about the waste, think about maybe the waste that each one of us would produce. So then my next question is, in the UK, in Britain, how much waste in kilograms do you think a person throws away each year, in average? So there will be people, as you said, that will throw furniture away, a whole sofa. But there might be people trying to follow that zero waste movement and not throw away anything. So in kilograms, how much do you think they'll throw away? So let's have a look at that question. But while people answer that, we had a few different numbers there. Robin, tell us a little bit about your work, because we've said before that you work in mining consultancy, and people might not straightforward connect that with waste. So tell us a little bit more about your work.
So what we're looking at earth resources, so where we might obtain metals from, for example, or the materials to make ceramics or glass. And what we have to consider there, that in kind of general terms, we can look at things which are the visible waste, which we see every day, which is tangible, we touch, we consume, etc. But then there's the waste which is involved in our supply chain. So all those other things that we use every day. So all the elements, the components which go into the products that we use. So in mining, one of the issues that we have is that we only take, well, we take as much as we can, but a fraction of that rock mass which is extracted from the ground. And the rest of it is essentially mineral waste. And one of the most wasteful elements of that, and the reason why we want to try and improve the efficiency of extraction, is we want to reduce the energy consumption in breaking those rocks up. So we have the actual product, the solid waste that we might see. We might see the aqueous waste, so water-based waste, but we also know that there's energy being wasted trying to break rocks up so we can get the stuff out that we need for our civilization, for how we work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Robin. So as I said before, maybe we don't think about that waste straightforward, the waste that we're producing while producing all the things that is there and is so important. And we'll be talking about it throughout the show. Let's have a look at the question. I think we had a small hiccup and revealed the answer. But we had somebody saying that actually maybe 1,000. So that was the answer, 1,000 kilograms. I think people were going quite up. We were beating up ourselves a little bit. But the actual answer is 400 kilograms. Now we're talking about household waste. But as Robin has said, there's other waste that you might not be producing directly. But it's part of the waste produced in the production of things that we use. So that takes us to another question. Let's think bigger. Let's think more than just a household. And let's think about the sources of waste. And our next question is, what is the biggest source of waste in the UK today? So outside for household, let's have a look at this. Is it construction and demolition? Is it domestic and household rubbish? Well, we were talking today, the 400 kilograms that each one of us are producing by average each year. Is it agricultural waste? Or is it clinical and medical waste products? And that actually leads to some of the comments that we were having. Evie on Facebook was mentioning masks, how they are now suddenly all over the place. So maybe the clinical and medical waste that we weren't so aware in the past after this pandemic, we are more aware of. So have a think and have a look at these four sources. What do you think is the biggest source of waste in the UK today? When you think about it, we had one question from Julia on YouTube. They were saying, I heard somewhere that you can tell a country's wealth by the amount of waste it produces. Is that true? Robin, I think I'm going to go to you and then we'll go to Alex. Is that true? Can we tell the wealth of a country by the waste they produce?
I guess you could say the wealthier a country is, the more it consumes. De facto, it generates more waste because people have a more, they use something, they move on, they can purchase more, their purchase power more. So waste is directly related to the economy, I would say. And we might turn around, everyone, CO2 numbers at the moment are really, really interesting, because we all say that if we do it territorially, for example, China is the world's largest producer of CO2, but China is also the world's largest manufacturer, and the consumption of those goods is not necessarily in China, it's in the Western world. So our waste is directly related to how much stuff we buy and how much stuff we use daily. So that, to me, yes, economy and waste, size of economy and waste is directly related.
Absolutely. Alice, anything to add in there from the plastic perspective, maybe?
So I'd agree. Definitely, you can afford more, you can afford to use more, and maybe the value of each item is less because you can afford to replace it, so you don't value it as much. But from a plastic perspective, some of the most impacted places by plastic pollution are developing countries. And I think whilst we maybe produce more waste, we also have facilities and systems to help us deal with it. So in the environment, it doesn't necessarily correlate the same because we might have a better developed waste management system. So sort of seeing the waste and knowing that we produce it are maybe slightly different factors.
So it might be shifting a little bit since we get more and more globalized as well. That's quite an interesting topic. Let's go back to the question that we threw in it, the biggest source of waste in the UK today, because we had loads of different answers. Ilana on Twitch was saying construction, maybe. Other people were going for agriculture. People were going for domestic house and household rubbish. So let's see the answer on this one. And the answer might surprise some people because it's actually construction and demolition. And that comes back to what we were talking before, the things that maybe we're not so aware of throwing away ourselves. Robin, there's an issue here regarding the materials we build with as well, and how long they last. Can you tell us a little bit more about this big source of waste, especially in the UK?
Well, you think about the built environment. So we're always throwing up new buildings. We're ripping down old buildings all the time. What we're seeing is, we're paving over the countryside, you might argue. There's constant housing developments out of town. There's new roads being put in, etc. So as we put stuff up, we're also tearing stuff down. And one of the couple of big components in there which are really scary, and one of them is concrete. So we look at concrete, it's one of the world's largest producers of CO2. So, for example, 1 ton of concrete mix probably generates about 900 kilograms of CO2. So it's almost a 1-to-1 ratio in that. And we're throwing up stuff all the time. And what we're starting to see is that the construction industry is really important in the UK economy. It provides lots and lots of jobs. And we're also seeing the designed lifetimes of buildings is reducing. So, that's the big thing. We have buildings now which are thrown up, which have a 40-year lifespan. So in 40 years' time, it's going to come back down again if it can't be fixed or patched up. So we have to have a really hard look at what we're doing. The Natural History Museum is great. Been there for well over 100 years. It's got a fortuitous design that allows it to stay up and to survive the pollution of London. And then we think about the museum going forward, we're going to move off to Harwell, and that's one of our big problems, is that we're going to have to try and persuade someone to build a building that's going to last 100 years plus, so we can have life connections. So, people are taking this seriously, but it's that disposable thing. We want space to constantly. Consuming land is one way you might put it, and as we consume land, we reduce the area for biodiversity. The image there is wonderful. How do we recycle concrete? Not particularly well. And the other problem with it is concrete's often got steel embedded in it, so we have to crush it up to get the steel out to be able to use it for aggregate, etc. So we're using energy all the time in that process.
And I suppose it's something that we think of, I don't know, for those of us who are not geologists, we think, it's concrete, it's rock, it comes back to the earth, it's not the same thing, but it is what you said, it's embedded in things, it's already been changed by us as well, so it's not the same thing. Robin, you said something there that really struck me, that was that some buildings are made to last 40 years, but I've got friends who've got mortgages that are 30-year mortgages or even 35, and that doesn't seem very sustainable there in any way. If you're going to buy a flat that is going to last as long as your mortgage.
Absolutely. And I mean, part of the problem there might be that we don't actually know how long some of these materials will last. And I think that's something that Alex will have comments on in terms of how long are plastics durable for. We think about, people's double glazing units with UPVC. They have like a 20-year guarantee, and that's because that's how happy they are to say it's going to last for. But maybe it's going to fail at 21 years. We don't know. So those kinds of questions about the products around you, the construction materials that we use, and we have to just design smarter, I believe. That's my case with it. Design smarter, build things so they can be taken apart and reused.
Absolutely. We'll go to the smarter designs in a minute. We had a comment from Kevin on Facebook. They were saying, we sadly live in a disposable society. Nothing seems to be made to last anymore. It's cheaper now to buy new than get repaired. We're going to start talking a bit more about recycling and how everything is disposable in a minute. But Robin, you mentioned there plastics and how Alex will have to tell us a little bit more about that. And actually, I want to ask Alex, we're hearing about 40-year-old buildings, that's what they last, but plastic lasts forever in the environment, or we don't know how long it might last, but we know that it will last a long time, definitely more than 40 years. Is that true?
Yeah, so in the environment, plastic doesn't break down, it breaks up, which means instead of biodegrading, going back to carbon dioxide and water and biomass, it just fragments into smaller particles. And obviously there'll be maybe chemicals released as well during that process, but it doesn't really go away, it just gets smaller. Even biodegradable plastics, or plastics designed to be biodegradable, are often only biodegradable in an industrial composter, which means they have to be heated to quite a high temperature for a long time. Anything that's in the ocean, especially if it's on the bottom of the ocean, say in the Mariana Trench, at the deepest parts of the ocean, it's not going to go anywhere because it's away from the light, it's away from heat, it's away from some of the bacteria that it might need. So it's much more isolated and it's not in the conditions that would help it break down. Now, it's not very long term in terms of how long other waste maybe lasts, but just a couple of years ago in the River Thames, so right on the museum's back doorstep, I pulled a crisp packet out that had a best before date of 1986. That crisp packet's older than me, and it's almost as old as the buildings that will be being demolished. So it was pretty much intact. If anybody wants to see it, it's actually on display in the museum at the moment. So if you're in South Kensington, you can go and see two 30-year-old crisp packets, actually. The two pieces of litter older than me. But, we don't know how long it will last because I took it out of the river in that condition. I took it out at that time. But if it had stayed there for another 40 years or another 100 years, how much of that crisp packet would be left? And we don't know because we're not in the future. We can't look back and say how much will be there.
Mm-hmm. So plastic waste, Alex, goes beyond what we can actually see, right? So you've been talking about how it breaks down. We've all heard about microplastics as well. And one thing that you told me is that it's even coming out of our clothes without us even noticing. What's that about?
So a lot of our clothes are made of synthetic. Actually, I try to wear organic, but that's from a research perspective, that if I bring plastic clothes into a lab, it's very hard to say that I'm not just sampling my own clothes that have shed. But a lot of clothes are nylon or polyethylene or polyester, for instance. And as we agitate these clothes, they shed fibers. One really clear example of that is putting them into a washing machine. That's a lot of movement and a lot of commotion for those clothes, and a wash can release up to 700,000 fibers. Now they'll mostly be filtered out at sewage treatment plants, but still in the Thames alone, the estuary has a catchment of 15 million people. So every time we do a wash, if we're all releasing 700,000 fibers, that's a lot that really quickly adds up. But it's not just in the washing machine, it's as we move around, it's, as we walk on carpet will shed fibers. As we move our curtains, they'll be shedding fibers. So there's fibers in our homes, in the air around us. So plastic really is everywhere, top of Mount Everest down to the deepest parts of the ocean.
That's really, really mind-blowing as well. we use it every day, and now is everywhere. There was a comment coming from our audience. Julie was saying, "What about rubbish plastic bags? Shouldn't we be using something more sustainable to throw away our trash in?" Was that? It's actually quite interesting that we are actually putting our trash in plastic.
I think the thing is, plastic is so useful, so durable. If we put waste in paper bags, for instance, if it's wet, that bag would rip. So we need something that is durable enough that it keeps our house clean and that we can transport it safely without contaminating everything. I mean, if we had a loose rubbish everywhere, we'd make a lot more waste. We'd lose a lot more of it. So I think, again, it's one of these issues where we maybe need to design better and use less. If we use less stuff, we'd have less stuff to put in plastic bags. We'd use less plastic bags. So it's lots of questions that all sort of link together for different aspects of waste.
There's no doubt that plastic is useful, and we use it every day, and we need it for medical stuff as well, for our daily lives. But it's about how we can reduce how much we produce and maybe recycle, which we'll be talking about in a minute. But Alex, you were saying that it's everywhere. So I've got a question for Robin. Is this sheer amount of plastic on Earth actually changing the environment from a geological point of view as well, Robin?
Well, I mean, we have to think about the geological timescale here, and the fact that the Earth will still be doing its thing, or geology will still be doing its thing long after we're gone. And this raises a few questions. I mean, Alex has just talked about plastic in the river systems. So that's another component that's been added to like the kind of erosion cycle. So we imagine that the rivers are where we erode down mountains and hills, and we wash off the grains of minerals from soils, etc. They enter the river and they're transported down, and they're deposited in the deltas and the estuaries. We're putting a new component into that. And what's going to happen to that plastic in the future? So if we bury that, like happens in the geological cycle, and we turn that sediment, that loose river sediment, into a rock, are we going to produce secondary oil deposits? Because we don't know how that plastic is going to behave long term in that environment. The images has been flashed up of the landfill is really fascinating, because that landfill is going to be covered, buried. And then what's that landfill going to look like in 1,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years? And is the future equivalent of a geologist going to come along and then find this weird deposit, this weird sedimentary stratified deposit of weird hydrocarbon and organics, bits of steel, bits of aluminium, all those different detritus which we just discard casually into the bins? And what is that going to look like in the geological record? It's kind of really, it's going to be fascinating if people, if there is humans then, or if there's even an equivalent of a geologist then, what will they find? And what will it pose is the other question.
And at the moment we don't know, which is something that I'm getting the vibe of. We don't know what we putting out there, and it will take a while for us to know. We just know that we are having that impact. But because we are having this impact, I think most of us will be trying to recycle more. As I said before, people who grew up in the 90s, we got that message of recycle, and everything will be okay. And I think loads of people try to do it. Loads of people recycle in their households. And try to reduce the sheer amount of waste that goes into a landfill and the wider environment. So I've got another question for our audience, and I want to say thank you so much for all the comments and answers and reflections that you send in. They are fantastic. We'll go through a few more next, but first let's throw another question to our audience, and that is, what was the UK recycling rate from households in 2019 and 2020? So let's think about how much. We've given you similar numbers. You can see that most of them are under 50%. We've got one above 50%. So have a think. Are we going to be positive and go over 50%? Are you going to go lower on the 28%? So what do you think? How much do you think the UK recycling rate was? Think about yourself. Think about how much effort you put in recycling, or how easy it is for you, because that's also a big aspect. Alex, plastic is something that I think when we are throwing things away, is one of the things that we're aware of. And I myself wonder sometimes, I'm throwing away a bottle, I take off the cap, I have a look at a plastic that came with the bottle, do I throw this in here? But can we recycle plastic, and can we recycle it forever? Because I suppose if we could, then that's the problem there. We just take the plastic, recycle, make more plastic with it.
So that concept is the circular economy, isn't it? It's recycling everything or reusing it, repurposing it so that we don't produce waste, so that it's a clean cycle. It's as efficient as it possibly can be. And like you said, I'm a 90s kid. I remember reduce, reuse, recycle being drummed into me, and it was almost always about plastic, really. But that's the thing. We can't recycle our way out of the plastic problem. For the moment, we don't have a like-for-like plastic recycling. You can't have a plastic bottle that just with the materials in that old plastic bottle will give you a perfectly new, reusable, brand new one to go and to put back into the system when you're done with it. There's a degrading that happens. Now, as I said, I'm a biologist. I'm not a chemist. So this is a simplified understanding that makes sense to me, and it's how I understand it. Plastics are polymers, which means they're a chain of chemicals, and those chemicals give plastic its properties, make it plasticky, basically. But as we recycle it, those chains get shorter and the quality of the plastic gets less. So the only way to make it usable or to make it as good as it was without downcycling it, which would be converting it into something of lesser value, is to put brand new virgin material into it. And virgin material is also cheaper, because you don't have to pay anybody to sort through the recycling and make sure that you've extracted as much as you can. And that's where what we can recycle becomes an issue, because it's an economic problem. You have to pay somebody to go through all those bottle caps, then you have to pay for the technology to extract it. And for something as small as a bottle cap, it's not really economically feasible. You don't get enough material that it justifies all of that effort. Plastic bottles are really easy to recycle. Plus, they're clear. They can become practically any other material you need them to be. Whereas black plastic will always be black. So you need to want black plastic. Or take a snack packet, which is a cardboard tube with metal ends and a plastic lid. Somebody's going to have to separate all of those components before it can be recycled. There's some things where it's just too labor intensive for it to be worth the time. So we really need to improve the cost of doing these things, but also the efficiency of doing them.
Mm-hmm. Because I imagine that in a capitalist world that we live in, if it doesn't make any profit, it's not going to be taken up, and that's a big issue there. But Alex, you were talking about circular economy as well there. So how we can produce things and then we can recycle. I want to chat a bit about that, but we had a couple of interesting questions and comments from our audience. Kevin on Facebook was asking, the new plastic alternative made from paper that is used to make carrier bags we get from shops at the moment, is that as eco-friendly as claimed? I think they mean the alternative that they are showing, or even the plastic bags that we use for food waste as well. How eco-friendly is that?
Ooh, difficult question. With paper, the question is land. We've got to grow those trees and we need water and space to do that. So I don't know what the carbon footprint of switching to paper would be. But in terms of biodegradable bags, like the food bags you've got, for starters, are they truly biodegradable? But then also you've got how are they made and what chemicals do they produce and how long does it take them to degrade? So there's lots of difficult questions in unwrapping whether something's better or worse. I mean, for me, the immediate thing I think of is clothes. I wear cotton because I can't wear plastic in a lab. But if everybody chose to wear cotton, where would we grow it all and how much water would it take? Because cotton is a really water-intensive crop. So how do you weigh the risks to the environment versus fibers in the environment that can be ingested and can be carcinogenic or can cause cancer or can affect the reproductive success of an animal, to climate change and holes in the ozone? How do you compare the two and balance up those challenges, really?
Which is taking us to a reflection that I think we are starting to make, which is we're producing a lot. Maybe we should be producing and using less. But let's go back to the circular economy point. Robin, can you tell us a little bit more about this idea of circular economy? Is it as simple as just saying we recycle everything that we produce and then that's it?
So the circular economy it's about not having to introduce more new raw materials into the economy and making or repurposing, reusing, recycling the existing material within the economy, so within the manufacturing cycle. Now, is it possible? Well, people like to think it is possible, but the current consumption at the moment, for example, is we need to prime the circular economy to actually enable it to even take off. And Alex has touched on a number of things, especially with cotton now. You know, like we start to talk about things about the supply chain, where things actually come from, the energy involved in that supply chain. What is the life cycle of a product? And that's not just from when it rocks up in the shop till you put it in the bin or dispose of it. That's the whole step from when we grow it or when we mine it to the energy involved in both those things. And how does that impact on what we're doing? And it gets really complicated. And so the other thing which comes with the circular economy, and before we came on air, we were talking about, I think, Christina's massive DVD collection. Yeah. So, and there's a real issue there. So we think about video or videotapes. You know, we started off and it was VHS. So people had stacks of VHS, and then it was DVDs. Then it was Blu-ray, similar technology, and now it's all held on computers or hard drives, and we stream everything. But that technology's changed, so the materials that we require for that technology's changed through time. So if we have a circular economy, how do we account for new inventions or new materials that come forward, and can we model them, and can we make sure that we have the stuff already available to use to make those new products? So we briefly mentioned it earlier, and it's that whole point about how do we design smartly? How do we design out waste? How do we design low energy consumption and how we do those things? And we're, you know, all of us are part of that equation. None of us are without sin when it comes to environmental damage. We all do it. Yeah. And we can claim what we're doing is like, well, everyone does it. You know, every human being is a parasite on the planet. So let's get over that step going forward. And the whole thing about moving forward about, we have to take responsibility. We have to use less stuff. We have to consume less stuff. So all these comments and all these thoughts are great, but we also have to have a degree of social justice in what we're doing. So we have to kind of be fair to everyone. We can't just pull up the drawbridge and say, nope, guys, you can't use all that stuff anymore because we've used it. So, you know, those kind of questions. It is a discussion. It's not just a philosophical debate. It's a real discussion for us all going forward.
Absolutely. And Robin, that actually brings that really nicely to a comment that we have from Chris on Facebook. They were saying, they were asking, what's the answer of the recycling rate in the UK? So let's have a look at that. They were thinking, is it 28? So they went for the lower percentage. And they were saying, I can see many people ignoring that they can help. I think that to encourage more people to do it, the recycling should be easier. And I think the packaging should be made out of just one material or easily separable. Factories should redesign the packaging. So let's have a look at the answer of the question that we gave before, because it's actually not that low, Chris, but it is 45%. So lower than 50% of that's the recycling rate of households in the UK, which I think is still lower. But you've brought up really, really interesting points there, Chris, and you were talking about the design. So let's talk a little bit about designing smarter. What does that mean? We might think straight into, energy producing methods, but also in plastics. So I'm going to go with you, Alex, first. What is designing smarter when it comes to plastics?
I think you need a conversation to be had, really. At the moment, there's lots of different steps, from the people that take the oil, the people that get the byproduct to turn that into plastic. So, they're all very distinct little businesses. So you could have somebody that sells a drink, a fizzy drink, and it's in a really attractive bottle. It's really recognizable as a specific brand. So customers will buy it. but that person never has a conversation with the person that has to recycle it or dispose of it. And really, we do need to have those conversations. And it is about not only designing what we've got better, but new technology and new materials are useful. I don't want to say just because I complain that biodegradable plastics aren't biodegradable in the environment, that just means we haven't got the technology where it needs to be. But those advances are still really useful. So we need conversations at each of the stages of a product's life cycle.
Absolutely. And Robin, let's go to you and actually start bringing up, does smarter means green as well? And what's the elephant in the room with green technology as well? So tell us a little bit about smart in design, and let's move into green technology as well.
So here, I mean, this image is beautiful. It's, some people find them ghastly. I'm one of those, but it's wind turbines. They're cropping up all over the world. And we look at that wind turbine there, we can see that big pile of steel which is supporting it, those big rotors made out of aluminium, etc. And then the big pile of concrete underneath it to hold it upright. But the big driver in there is the generator, and that's made with magnets. And more and more now we're using so-called rare earth magnets, which use elements such as neodymium, and they throw up a number of issues. So a magnet might last for around about 25 years in one of these things. And currently, and people are working on this because this is a huge question for the economy, is how do we recycle those magnets? How do we get those magnets back into the system? How do we get that neodymium back to make new magnets with? It's just not that simple. It's really difficult, and it's actually really energy consuming as well to recycle those magnets. And the other thing that comes up is that neodymium is mostly sourced from one particular country, and the ore that generates that, so the minerals which come out of the ground from which we extract the neodymium, often have a significant amount of an element called thorium, which is radioactive. So in generating a windmill or a wind turbine, we also generate some low-level nuclear waste, which is slightly ironic, So, and people are talking about on the chat about how we send waste overseas. Also, the products we use when we take the raw materials, it's beneficial for the West often because we don't see the waste which is generated during the production of those raw materials. So this offshoring, as some people would call it, of responsibility to the environment is a huge thing, and it's at both ends of the supply chain. It's at when we finish with a product, but it's also when we build a new product. So these all the time.
So yeah, Robin, I think you referring to a comment we had from a viewer online. They were saying that wealthy countries sending waste to developing countries, but we're also taking products from them as well and creating the waste in those countries as well. So that's a very, very important point there. You mentioned there, Robin, so there are many other green technologies, and we need to think about it. We get into the end of the show, and I don't want to not talk about something that you roughly talk. You talk about nuclear waste, and that brings us to nuclear power as well, which is that source of energy that has been there for a while, and there's a lot of controversy around it. It has its advantages, but it comes to at the cost of long-lasting waste. Can you touch a little bit upon nuclear waste, Robin?
So nuclear power generation is a wonderful thing, and I'm saying that to be controversial, to wind you all up. And the point being is that we get a lot of bang for our buck in terms of energy production and consistent energy production from a relatively small site over an extended period of time. A nuclear power plant will last far longer than a set of wind turbines, for example. But there is the elephant in the room, and that is the waste which is generated. And, as Alex has said earlier before we came online, is that we kind of know how long that waste is going to last because we can calculate what the half-life of that waste is. And the issue there is people don't want to live next door to it, right? And we can understand that, yeah? No one wants to live next door to a load of radioactive waste. We could bury it, and I'm sure we have the technology now to make sure we can bury it effectively, efficiently, and safely. But we cost a lot of money to do that. And it's all about what are we willing to put up with for the cost of our electricity or the cost of our power? And that's the big question that we have to put out there. Now, this is where we can bring Alex in. So we know approximately how radioactive the waste is going to be for, but do we know how long plastics are going to reside in the environment? You know, that's the thing. We can't separate all these environmental issues out in saying to nice black and white or binary questions, because they are not. They are complex. It involves people's jobs. It involves the wider economy, and it also involves wider the globe. You know, it's not just one country's issue. You know, what's going on in the environment is it's without borders, and it should be without politics.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think when it comes to waste, Robin, it has a lot of bad rep because we've seen massive disasters like Chernobyl or Fukushima happening, and we've seen the effects on it. And we're aware, as you said, and Alice was mentioning before, we are aware of how long nuclear waste lasts for. But then we've been talking about plastic, and we've been talking about how it breaks down into nanoparticles and it's everywhere. And so I want to throw this question out of there. You said there's nothing, it's not black or white, it's not a binary thing, but we're so aware of the disadvantages of nuclear waste. But you know, we're talking about plastic that lasts for a long time. We don't know the effects it has on us or the environment. So is it down to we're not sure about how plastic affects us? We can't talk about one being worse or less worse, but do we need to know more to actually be aware of how bad our waste, the things that we are, you know, throwing away every day, compared to something that we know can be disastrous as nuclear waste? Alex, I'm gonna go to you with that.
So we know some things. We know that it contains chemicals that can be cancer causing, or that they're mimic hormones, so they can affect your reproductive success or your growth. But the specifics of how much plastic you have to eat to have certain effects, or you know, how much plastic even we're eating at any time, we're only starting to get that information. So we, as a scientist, I'd always say, let's know more, let's learn more, because it's my job. So, but we really do need to understand it better. You know, plastic isn't one type of pollution. It's not, there's plastic, there's polyester, there's nylon, polypropylene, and then within those we put a flame retardant in, we put a red dye in, we put plasticizers in, we put all of these different things in. So it's really is a sort of chemical soup, to be honest. And that means that our oceans, our rivers, the air, they're also chemical soups. And it's a combination of different shapes of plastic. If you've got a microbead from a face scrub, fibers from clothes. And it really is hard to test for all of those because the concentrations vary so differently all around the world. So how do we make a risk assessment for such a complex pollutant?
Absolutely, that's a really great reflection over there. Thank you so much, Alex. Robin, I'm gonna go to you there. When it comes down to comparing, which, as you said, is not black and white, but what do we have in our hands there?
In terms of plastics versus nuclear waste or radioactive waste, or it could be any kind of waste we go. I mean, look, we have to think about what the effect on the total environment is, and that's not just about humans, right? You know, humans are, as I said earlier, parasitic planet. We have to think about what the overall effect on biodiversity are, etc. Those catastrophic accidents such as Chernobyl or Fukushima are, you know, we see them, they make the news for a few days, and then every so often they crop up again and stuff like that. And that's a point source, and that's how we do. We have this constant cycle of things which are going on. There's more benign, nasty things, or something, benign's the wrong word, but things sitting there in the background just getting worse all the time. You know, how much lead did we put into the environment when we were still adding lead to petrol, for example? What will be the future of all the kind of, you know, for example, is it efficient to put solar farms everywhere because we just consume land? And that's scary because they're only efficient for maybe 10% of the time. Especially in the UK, it might be more so if you're in a much sunnier climate, but we make choices. And all I would say is we just need to use less stuff, and a lot less stuff. So that's all from me.
And I can see Alex nodding along to Robin, because I think that is one of the conclusions of this talk, that we've been talking about recycling, we've been talking about our waste, we've been talking about how different things that we use are useful and we need them, and how we're looking at this. And at the end, we just need to use less. We just need to be more aware of the things that we're using and how we're using them, and how we can go into create that real circular economy when, you know, we are actually not producing massively amounts of things that then will go into waste. But that takes us to the end of the show. We've reached the end of the show today, but that was fantastic. I want to say thank you so much to both the guests, Robin and Alex, for this amazing discussion today. You elicited loads of comments and questions and reflections in our audience. So thank you so much, everyone, as well, that were behind the screens commenting and sharing your experience and interacting with us. That was exactly what we wanted to do, and hopefully you've gained as much as I have from this talk. I'm going to say goodbye to our guests today. Alex, Robin, thank you so much, and hopefully see you soon for another of these talks. Yeah, bye-bye. I'll see you next time. But also thank you so much, everyone behind there, with all your questions, comments, and so on. We didn't come here to offer answers, but hopefully to raise awareness. And I think we've managed to at least make you reflect on this topic. There's no doubt that this generation and future generations, we might need to completely rethink our way of life, and stop ourselves drowning in this waste world. Thank you so much for listening and taking part. And if you enjoyed the show and want to support the work that we do at the Natural History Museum, consider making a donation. Big or small is always useful. You can donate by clicking on the button on YouTube, or just going directly to our website. We'll put a link in the chats as well. But that's all from us today. We'll be back again next month for another Lates Online. But until then, thank you and have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.